Greetings and welcome to the Warhammer 40,000 Kill Team video, where today I'm going over how to be a better opponent for Kill Team. But before getting into things, please remember to like and subscribe as well as comment. Let me know what you thought of today's video, if you found it useful and helpful. Remember, I've got a Discord you can check out for free in the episode description below, an affiliate link at Element Games, an affiliate link and discount code at Crossfire Games, and a Patreon if you want to give me some more support. But yeah, I'm back in America, as you can see by the valuable egg. And today I'm going to talk about how to be a better opponent for Kill Team. Now, this is generally for tournament play, but this also applies for, your weekly gaming nights, your regular gaming sessions. So while it's more for a competitive focus, it will apply to all aspects of Kill Team. So let me go over my 6 tips for how you can be a better opponent. So first up, when it comes to after introducing yourself to your opponent, always ask if they're familiar with the Kill Team you're playing. Now, this is a good way to establish a baseline for not only your opponent, but the game as a whole. It's no harm, because if your opponent says, oh yeah, I know how your Kill Team works, you can kind of just go from there and just leave that. But if your opponent goes like, actually no, I haven't played that Kill Team before, or they can go like, I've played it once or twice, but it's been a while, then you can actually immediately clear up any misconceptions and not leave things for later in the game. This is really important, because otherwise you don't want this ambiguity happening mid-game, especially if you just kind of assume your opponent knows everything. And it might feel a bit pedantic, but I would always ask every opponent this, even if you think they're an experienced tournament vet, because a lot of times I have people, even when I'm playing against them, whether I'm playing against experienced opponents or people are playing against me, and they just gloss over, just immediately start deploying and stuff, and I go like, oh, hold on, could you just explain your Kill Team to me? Because I don't know, I don't know it in depth. And it's just a good way to establish a baseline. As you said, you hate this ambiguity happening during your game, and worst case scenario happens during a key moment. So establishing this first is an important way to get a good gameplay going forwards. Next, we have explaining operatives. Now, this might seem a bit simple, but it also gets more complicated, especially if you're using proxied kill teams, or you've kit bashed your own miniatures. Once again, I've found a lot of people just assume people know operatives when that isn't really the case. And especially when you're naming stuff, it helps if you point out each operative. So when I'm playing, not only do I point out my Kill Team, I go each operative name by name, depending on either their official name or what I'm calling them. So if someone's like my grenade specialist, I go pick up this model and go, this is my grenadier, pick up this is my leader, so on and so forth. As long as you establish all of this early and at the start of the game, it really cleans things up, especially once again if you are using converted miniatures. But then even if you're not, it just helps establish an easy baseline, and once again minimizes all kinds of confusion, because once again, not everyone's going to remember all the unique names of every operatives. And while it may be easy for people to identify what operatives are there from stuff like Angels of Death, where they're all Space Marines, when it comes to more obscure stuff like Eldari kill teams, and even our plethora of human kill teams, where you've got common archetypes like medics and comm specialists, helping just identify that once again clears up a lot of confusion, and it sets the baseline. Because especially if you're using short form, as I said, calling grenadiers instead of explosive specialist or demolition specialist, then your opponent can kind of go okay, cool, you said grenadier, I know where your grenadier is. Once again, it makes it easier to play the game, minimizes confusion, and actually makes it more efficient to play. Because when you go okay, I'm going to go for this operative, and you name them, I'm going to go for my plasma gunner, your opponent goes, okay, it's going for his plasma gunner there. Once again, just minimizing confusion and improving communication for the game. Now, another big thing that people generally always talk about and has become more commonplace is explaining the tricks of your Kill Team. Now, when it comes to tricks, this could be gotchas and just special things that can kind of be reactive ways to catch out your opponent. So for example, at the moment I'm playing Brood Brothers. So when I play Brood Brothers, I talk about all their tactical firefight ploys and any abilities that can happen mid-activation, and just all my key abilities, really. So I go to my opponent I've taken this leader, the Magus, he means I'm immune to all APL modifiers. I ignore piercing, and I also ignore being injured. And then, you know, I go through all my firefight ploys and when they trigger, and then any special abilities of my operatives that you wouldn't like generally know. Like, for example, you know, you don't need to explain gunners, but then stuff like, you know, your icon ward, and the fact that even though my comms is a comms, it also has an ability to delay operatives. Now, this is really important, and it kind of varies between players. Some players will only explain their gotchas at the start of the game, and they will usually go like, okay, I've now explained this again. I'll give you like one free chance, and then I won't point it out anymore. And then others like me, I'll just always point them out because I just want to make it always clear. But it's important you establish this. And once again, you know, I get a lot of people, I either see it or it happens to me where people just assume that either I or their opponent knows everything about their kill team, and when reactions happen, because we have, what, like nearly 40 factions in the game, no one is going to be able to remember every faction's minute interaction. And I'm not saying you have to explain every single detail, but these are more about things where, as I said, they're reactive tricks, kind of stuff that can happen mid-activation or that you can react to which your opponent may not suspect. Because once again, the worst thing to happen is your opponent does something and then you go, okay, I'm going to do this. For example, like I think a good example is with Blades of Cain, when you do Contempt. So your opponent rolls really badly, they're going to go, I'm going to spend a CP to reroll this, and you go, no, I'm going to spend a CP to stop you rerolling anything whatsoever. And then your opponent goes, oh, I wasn't even aware of that. That's completely screwed me over. You don't want that kind of reaction. Now, at least if you've established this and explained this all at the start of the game, then it can kind of lessen the blow. Obviously, you can't stop your opponent feeling bad when this happens, but as long as you've established this and let them know, then you've kind of not only covered yourself, but made sure at least you've established this before everything has happened. Now, you will have scenarios where even though you have explained it and repeatedly explained it, people will still go, wow, I wasn't aware of that, and still react badly. But as I've said, in that case, as long as you can go like, I did say at the start of the game, and I have been saying this happened, and it has now happened. I'm really sorry you feel bad, but I have established this quite a lot during the game, or I've already told you, right? Not in a like condescending way, but just going like, I did make this open knowledge. Because the worst case is just like this unintentional, like, oh, feel bad, gotcha, now I'm just going to do my stuff. So it's really important to establish this. Now, this is probably the most difficult thing because, as I said, even when you explain stuff, you will have people who just react badly, and it's important you explain everything, because the problem is I've seen people also go like, oh, I explained this because I thought it was something they wouldn't be aware of, but then, you know, I didn't explain anything else, or my opponent didn't ask, so I didn't explain. And it's really murky, because technically both sides are right, but to be the better opponent, always establishing everything at the start. And the issue is you may actually spend a lot of your game, not a lot of it, but at least the first 5 minutes explaining your kill team and all their tricks. And people may think, oh, that's too much to explain, but I think it's a really good precedence to set, because once again, if these things do happen during the game and your opponent gets upset, at least you can always go, I did establish this. I'm so sorry you feel that this was unfair, but I did point it out at the start of the game. So it's a way to back yourself up, but also to make sure your opponent remembers and doesn't feel like they have a bad time. Now, another way to be a better opponent is dice rolls. So when it comes to dice, you know, generally, as long as you're running like one kind of symbol and it's on the 6, you don't need to explain your symbols to your opponent. But if you're one of those fabulous people running dice with multiple symbols, please establish that at the start of the game, because otherwise it's going to be hella confusing. Because I've played people who use dice with symbols on the 1 and 6, and it just gets confusing. Now, most commonly, these are old Games Workshop dice where they have like a symbol on the 6 and then like a skull for the 1. So it's just easy establishing. But that's an important thing to establish just to like minimize confusions. But then another thing is always clarify what happens with cocked dice. This is, and with dice trays. So for example, I use a dice tray and I always say, anything I roll in the tray is, you know, legit. If I roll anything outside of the tray, I'll roll it back in the tray. So I always establish this either when at the start of the game or when I'm about to roll a dice for the first time. Because the most confusing thing and most annoying thing is where, you know, a dice bounces out of the dice tray and then you go like, oh no, I'll keep it. But then you roll it again when it didn't roll what you want. So it's really important establishing that, especially if you're sharing a dice tray, because I generally share my dice tray with my opponents. So it's also to go like, oh, this rule is for both of us, and it's to show like I'm applying the rule to myself, but also to you, because you can't just go like, oh, bounce out and then reroll what you want. It just makes it easier, and then establishing what a cocked dice is. So saying like, oh, if my dice lands angled, and then if I put another dice on top of it and it slides off, that's cocked, and we'll re-roll it. Because once again, the worst case is all this stuff happening mid-game and one person being upset at it and the other person not. Because once again, it minimizes confusion, it minimizes any chance of like, you know, someone feeling bad, but also just makes the game state really clear, especially if you're not using a dice tray and you're rolling on the board, because especially with terrain, dice can land in weird positions, and it can always be like, technically that's cocked, but then you don't want to be in a situation where that's a cocked dice, but you haven't established what a cocked dice is at the start of the game. So this is like, it seems like too much, like maybe this is like too extra, but it's really important to do all this, especially with dice trays. Personally, I'm a big fan of dice trays. Not only is it a clear space for somewhere to roll dice, because an important thing is to see where dice are rolled, but also it minimizes like miniatures and terrain getting hit. Now, also coupled with this is always roll your dice where your opponent can see them, and make sure your opponent sees your dice before you re-roll or change any dice. This can actually be quite a big issue, and I've seen people like quick roll dice and then assume their opponent has seen it and then start doing re-rolls, or immediately pick them up and start sorting them out to go like, okay, now we'll see your defense dice and stuff, or sorting out like, you know, attack and defense dice. It also minimizes cheating, because sometimes there is a way to cheat where you can roll dice, quickly pick them up and tell your opponent, oh yeah, this is what I rolled. So always roll them in a clear space everyone can see, and roll dice when your opponent is able to see. Like I will always go, okay, now I'm going to roll my attack dice so my opponent has heard the prompt that I'm rolling my dice and then can see the dice. It's just a way to make sure you're safe and that your opponent is aware. Because also you want to minimize accusations of cheating, and also you don't want to cheat your opponent. It does look really weird if you're not waiting for your opponent to see where the dice is. Sometimes people may be distracted, they're putting stuff back in their case, they're getting tokens, they're checking their phone, they're getting a drink. Once again, minimizing all kind of confusion and ensuring you're having a clean and fair game. This is really important. It seems minute, but it's something a lot of players don't realize when it comes to dice as a whole. Next, don't be afraid to ask questions. I always ask questions, and when I'm playing new players, I constantly tell them, look, if you have any questions about my kill team, don't be afraid. You have any questions about the game state, just ask. A lot of times when I'm speaking to people or I'm seeing people who've had bad experiences in Kill Team, it's because they just haven't asked any questions. And this can kind of link into everything, but you know, you can ask questions at any point in the game, and it always helps minimizing confusion, because, you know, it doesn't even have to mean like, oh, you always have to ask your questions to your opponent. You can also ask the TO, like judges, for questions as well. If you need clarification on stuff and you and your opponent can't settle anything, always ask a judge or TO, because they'll be able to come and settle stuff. If you might have any confusions, like the biggest thing is I see people go like, wow, that's crazy. That seems like really unfair when an opponent's effect goes off and they just like let it roll on. I would always go, it's okay if I can just read that. I'm not calling you a cheater or anything wrong. I just want to read this rule or interaction for myself to make sure it's correct for me and that I remember it. Because sometimes you go like, wow, this can really happen, and then you read it and you go like, oh yeah, okay, wow, that's something I didn't encounter or something I didn't expect. It also just minimizes confusion, once again ensuring you have a good, fun game, and it helps with your own learning. Asking questions is super important, even miniatures, like minuscule stuff like, oh, how much command points do you have left? How many victory points are you on? Because it helps plan out your game plan and also make sure the information you're tracking is correct. Because especially when it comes to tracking command points and victory points, it means you know what the accurate game state is, so you can plan like, do you need to be more aggressive? Are you in the lead? Do you just need to play the same or a bit more defensively? It's all this kind of important stuff. And it can also vary to like, oh, how familiar you are with your kill team, stuff like that. How long have you been playing? All these kind of questions. And obviously it may be more difficult because, you know, Kill Team and Warhammer as a whole is a very social game and it can be quite draining for people. But asking questions is so important. It kind of links to everything, but it's really useful. It helps like clarify confusion, ensure you and opponent are both aware of what's going on, minimizes any errors, and if you've got like rules disputes, you can like immediately ask your opponent, and then if there's any confusions, you can clarify with the tournament organizers or other judges to make sure everything is clear. Because the worst thing is I've seen people have bad times, or they don't agree with what's happened, but then they just like don't ask any questions, or once again, when stuff happens that they weren't expecting, they never ask the questions like, oh, hold on, could you just like explain your kill team to me? Like, for example, if your opponent doesn't ask if you're familiar with your with their kill team, you can go, oh, hold on, like, please, can you just explain this to me? This is something I do regularly because everyone assumes I know every kill team in depth. And while I have a good knowledge, when it comes to kill teams I haven't played regularly, I'll go like, oh, hold on, could you just explain everything to me? Or when someone says, I'm going to use this stratagem and just does it, can you go, oh, hold on, could you just explain it to me? I don't know the name, but I'd just like to know the effect. That kind of stuff. It's minuscule stuff, but not only does it benefit your own learning and experience, it makes sure the game as a whole is a really fun experience. And finally, the most important rule, this is something I've talked about for many times when I was playing Warhammer Underworlds. I've even wrote an article about it for Games Workshop. Don't be a dick. Yeah, just very simple, don't be a dick, right? You know, if your opponent asks questions, answer them. If your opponent wants to see your rules, show it to them. You know, obviously it's easier now because you have the kill team app, so they can look it up. But just don't be a dick. I've seen a lot of people jump into games assuming the worst, and it's really strange. This is a golden rule of my club Hate, the Hackney area tabletop enthusiasts, and yeah, it's just can apply to any game system, but it makes sure you're good, right? Don't be a dick. It's so simple, but it encompasses so many things. You know, you want people to have a good experience, a good time, and as long as you're making sure you're not being a dick, at least you know you've done everything on your side. Now, this can be stuff like being really clear, always like explaining stuff to your opponent, making sure you're asking them about stuff instead of just like explaining it to them for no reason. Like if your opponent goes like, oh no, I'm familiar with your kill team, that's fine, and you still just explain anything every way, like that would be very annoying. But also like try and go into each game with an open mind. Obviously it can be difficult when you're playing against like people that may have a bad reputation and stuff, or based on like sometimes people's like body language. But usually if you go in with an open mind and just approach things with an open view, generally you can find people may look like they're not having a good time or may not be a good opponent, but they may be just have zoned out or just a bit tired. And then the moment you start talking to them and they feel like your energy is like very good and positive, they'll usually react back like the same in a good way. Because if you start just like being bad faith or like, you know, not establishing important things like what to do with rerolls, not being clear to your opponent, like being very like, haha, I've got you, like, you know, those kind of things, it just sets a bad precedence and it makes the whole game toxic. Because whether you're playing competitively or your local game night or just like with your friends, you always want everyone to have a good time so that you're both having fun no matter who wins or loses. And remember, someone's always going to win or lose, right? There's, you know, generally we could draw, but when it comes to these kind of games, someone's going to win, someone's going to lose, and you're not always going to win every game of Kill Team. So it's always approaching that, being good when you lose, good when you win. Don't like rub it into your opponent's face. Be, you know, be a gracious loser, because it's really an important skill to learn how to lose. But the general principle is just don't be a dick, don't assume the worst, and then it'll be really good for you and your opponent as a whole. Because not only will, you know, they have a good time, they'll probably tell other people, and then you'll build up a good rep of everyone just going like, oh yeah, I love playing this person, like everyone's had a good time, I'm in for a good game. And when you've just got that open good energy, everyone will have a good time no matter who wins or loses. Once again, summarizing how to be a better opponent, whether it be for tournament games or your regular game nights. Always ask your opponent if they're familiar with your kill team, because immediately if they go like, yeah, I know how your kill team works inside and out, I used to play it, or my friend plays it a lot, you can immediately skip a step. And if your opponent says no, you can explain stuff to point out key things. Always explain your operatives, especially if you've converted or kit bashed anything. Once again, especially if you're like naming operatives by your own nicknames and naming conventions, as long as you go, this operative is my gunner, this Operative is my grenadier, this is my leader, so on and so forth. You establish at the start, so when you're explaining things mid-game, the opponent knows who you're talking about and what is what. Always explain gotchas. This is a simple thing, like anything that can happen reactively based on what your opponent has done, from like firefight ploys to special abilities. That's the key thing to establish at the start of the game. And then you can either keep reminding your opponent or say like, oh, I explained it now, so if it happens, I won't explain it again because I've already pointed it out. At least as long as you establish it at the start of the game so your opponent is aware of what your kind of stuff your kill team can do, minimizes bad feelings and confusions, and basically catching out your opponent mid-game. Then when it comes to dice rolling, always explain what your dice are if you're running dice with multiple symbols. Always, if you're using a dice tray, explain what's the dice tray rules. Like, are you only going to roll in the dice tray, like if dice bounce out, and then explain what cocked dice are. And then also always roll dice where your opponent can see them, and make sure your opponent sees the dice, so you don't do like technically fast roll cheating. Never be afraid to ask questions, and always ask questions, because it minimizes confusion, make sure both people are aware of the game state, and also if you're confused about a ruling and you don't agree with your opponent, you can always ask a judge or TO, because the biggest thing I've had people refuse just to ask like someone outside the game who's there to help mediate, because they're able to solve these kind of situations for you and clarify stuff. And then just don't be a dick, right? Always be kind, cautious, always expect the best from your opponent. Don't go into a game expecting things to go badly, and also be a good winner and a good loser, because someone's always going to win or lose in Kill Team. We can draw, but generally someone's going to win and someone's going to lose. As long as you're not a dick and a positive person, everyone's going to have a good time, and more you're going to build this good rep, so more people are more likely to be like hyped to play you because they'll have a good time regardless. But these are really simple things. It's only about 6 steps, and it's just really useful stuff. It's something I do pretty much every game, and I try to do everything every game. Now, you're not going to be a saint and like always get this right, but as long as you're trying to meet every goal, it's a good thing to do, because it's really important being a good opponent. You want people having a good experience when they play Kill Team, whether they win or lose, and that they always come back for more, because it really makes me disheartened when I see people play games and they go like, no, I had a really bad time, either like this happened or like my opponent was really bad, and like there's something both could have taken away, and then like they get burned out. Because I hate seeing people quit because they've had a bad experience. And it's like, I'm not saying like they shouldn't quit, but as long as we can like all act in this kind of way, we can minimize stuff like these kind of incidents from happening, so we get more people playing and continuing playing, whether it be at tournament events or your like regular gaming nights. So hopefully this helps. Like, I'm not trying to be the messiah of Kill Team in my golden egg form, but it's just a useful thing that I've learned over the years. I've repeated it a lot, like when I was in Warhammer Underworld, and I've repeated it a lot like in conversations with people and on podcasts, but I've never properly clarified it for Kill Team. So hopefully this is useful and helpful to everyone. But that's pretty much it for me today. Please remember to like and subscribe as well as comment. Let me know what you thought of today's video, if you found it useful and helpful. Let me know if I've missed anything out. And remember, I've got a Discord you can check out for in the episode description below, and a affiliate link on my games, and a affiliate link and discount code at Crossfire Games, and a Patreon if you want to give me some more support. And I just want to say thanks to all my patrons, because I really appreciate your support and it helps the channel so much. But yeah, that's pretty much it for me today. This is my one video for the week, because I'm in America on holiday, and then I'll be back with more videos next week. When I'm back in the UK, I can do more video guides, because there's stuff I need to record, you know, using miniatures and stuff. But for now, you get to enjoy my eggy goodness. And remember, no matter what happens during your game of Kill Team, as long as you're not a dick, you will always win, as long as you can roll a crit.